right, hello and welcome to another Expert Insight interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from an actual little bit of a rainy San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Geoffrey Reid, who is up above me up there in Montreal, Canada. How are you doing, Geoffrey?
I'm fantastic, John. How are you?
Good. And Jeffrey's, spent your career in sales, and then you have spent a lot of time now in training and trying to educate people, and especially make up for the lack of sales education that exists in business schools and elsewhere. Your recent book, The Revenue Catalyst: Mastering the Art of Sales, this is where you lament that lack of education and lay out a framework to teach sales as if it were a fundamental university discipline, a fifth pillar, in addition to finance, marketing, accounting, and HR. And as we were just talking before we came on air, Geoffrey, it's a reality and a truism. It's like, pretty much every university, every college has marketing programs, and lots of people do marketing, and lots of people graduate with marketing degrees. However, when they get out into the world, they suddenly come across the reality where there's one marketing job for every like 5 bazillion or whatever sales jobs, and a lot of them end up in sales. And one of the problems with sales today is because it's not a discipline taught in college, because it's been like portrayed negatively in popular culture, because people always think of the used car salesperson. It's people don't embrace the career, and so you tend to have a lot of people who are in that career who actually didn't really want to be in it in the first place. And we need to change that, because we need to educate people and make it a career that people want to be in and want to succeed, and it is a great career. So just give me the background to you writing the book in the first place.
Yeah, look, everything you said, John, is spot on, and it just happens to be where we're at. But there's lots of opportunity to remedy some of these deficiencies in the future. And I look, the premise of the book, and I really came out of patterns that I was trying to recognize after having done, probably 2,000 interviews for sales jobs, and asking a lot of business students, have you ever taken a sales course? And some of them have said one, and some of them have said none. And it really incubated in my mind. I couldn't figure out why this was happening, but I did have an opportunity, and I start the book off with a story of this type, where I had a visit from the vice chancellor and former president of the university I used to teach graduate school at, Concordia University in Montreal. And I was living in London, UK at the time. And Dr. Alan Shepard came along with his associate to visit. And he started off the interview, really with, how are we doing? Are we preparing students to be well positioned to work in your organization? And I said, look, quite well, because the people I'd hired had adapted nicely. But I used that as an opportunity to ask the question, why is there so little sales education? And he laughed, and he gave me an answer that I thought was profound, yet worth exploring. He said, most professors aren't comfortable teaching things that they don't know enough about. And I think that is also a reflection of the career path of a lot of academics, and where it diverges from sales. And that really just gave an opportunity to delve deeper into that question, and to realize that there's a huge gap in that particular in the discipline that causes the misinformation, stigmas, and that would all be solved if there were better sales education to work with. So that's a big part of what this book is trying to remedy.
Yeah, and I guess that's a really interesting point. I never thought of that, actually, that point about academics and just not having the background in sales, so not being comfortable, and perhaps then a bit of it is the fault of sales professionals, particularly those with a lot of experience, that they maybe haven't parlayed what they know into academia and actually kind of help change things from the inside.
Yeah, look, I think these have been very independent tracks that may not have been infiltrated by people who have had a finance career or a marketing career or an HR career, who've easily stepped into the realm of academia to teach a prepackaged course or set of courses, just because there's no real room. I don't think, first of all, the universities really know what they're looking for when it comes to how to bring in someone that is going to represent a best practice that they could put their stamp of approval on. But the other side of it is, just a complete lack of synergy between the academic side and the sales side that has created so much on the basis of on hands work on the ground and experience that allows one to have a perspective. In my book, I don't have one footnote, even though I'm an academic and I taught grad school and I love using sources. But everything that I write about is primary research and observations that I developed over 25 years, looking at aggregated data from 50 offices and hundreds and thousands of salespeople to come up with conclusions as to what is the appropriate way to position this. That type of perspective is difficult to gain if one is also pursuing an academic track.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And so your book has a framework in it to how to actually teach sales. So can you take me through that a little bit? Because I think that's, again, I mean, this is a great gap you're filling here, because I think there's lots of people maybe who'd want to do this, and maybe even colleges would be interested in doing this, but they don't know where to start.
Yeah, well, look, I think right at the beginning there's the need to consider whether one is doing B2B or B2C sales, because these are really represent different things. In B2B, the marketing role is really a lead generation exercise, whereas in B2C, business to consumer, it is the heartbeat of the strategy that penetrates the minds of consumers. So it's it plays a much different function. But in both sides, and where I start off the book is really about product positioning, and how far down the field, depending upon what sport you want to use the analogy, are you going to carry the ball? I use a lot of American Canadian football analogies, much to the chagrin of my European friends who consider football to be a different sport. But that really it is. If you take a company like Apple, for example, its product positioning is such that you're not that far away from the goal line. Salesmanship does not play that massive a role. Whereas there are other corporate, other companies that have a really hardcore in the sales, and they give you the ball on your side of half, and you have to run it through for everyone. Negotiating deals, with multiple parties, complex sales process, and everything in between exists between those two extremes, and really understanding what type of product you have and what are your goals and what are your assets and how to position it is really the starting point for coming up with that positioning. And once you have that positioning, then there's a sales strategy that can be employed. And that's really where I get into in chapter 2, where look, we're all learning to sell from the time that we're 2, and we're trying to convince our parents to buy us stuff, and so when children are 2, the only way to get things is really by being persuasive. Please, mom, buy me the sugar cereal. We're going to eat it together. It's going to be great. That is, and that is how everyone starts their sales career, with persuasion. It is very different than what I would call the other extreme of sales that is a little bit more sophisticated, which is really a negotiation type model where where you're making it their idea and you're leaving the breadcrumbs for them to follow through a resistance model, asking people, why should we accept you as a client? What are your assets? It's the opposite of persuasion. So everything in between requires a strategy, and that strategy has to be matched with the type of product that exists. And that's really how the book starts off, and going into other things, but I can elaborate.
But what's great, what's great about what you just outlined there, though, Geoffrey, is, and I think another kind of maybe thing that a lot of people on the outside don't understand, is that there are many different types of careers in sales. There are many different types of sales roles. There are different types of salespeople, as you said. I mean, all the way from from the person who's helping present the product all the way to the deep consultative seller, and team selling, all of those. And it's a much broader field, I think, than people often appreciate. And the levels of skill required, just like in any other career, goes up and up the further you go into maybe the high-end consulting sales.
Yeah, look, indeed, it's complex decision-making processes, but it's in front of us every day. When you look at how banks and universities sell, because they're generating revenue,
Mm-hmm.
that the banks are saying, "Why should we give you the loan? Do
Yeah.
you have any credit? Why, how do we know you're going to pay us back? Okay, well, think about it. It's very much a resistance model. Universities are doing the same thing. Why should we accept you? So these models are in front of people every day, and but they don't see it as being sales. But that is fundamentally part of the spectrum that I just described. And when you layer that with different dimensions of complexity, meaning, is it a complex, how deep does the decision-making process go? And are you having to get multiple people on side, or is it a streamlined, pitch the decision maker and get a yes or no, even if it's a high value short sales cycle? All of these things can be considered, and every decision should be scrutinized carefully, as if it were a complex art. Winging it just is not. You're leaving money on the table.
Yeah, and I think that's it's a great point, and I think that's why it's such a shame that there isn't more sales education in colleges, because it is such a wide ranging and complex area. And I think also now with the advent of AI and all of these tools and stuff, it's going to take out a lot of the I know I don't like to use lower end, but maybe the more simple, superficial end of selling. But it's going to force people to be higher skilled, to be better at, relationship building, to be more creative and all of that. So again, I think it's playing exactly into what you're talking about here, is the need to really learn to understand, to establish what end of the sales area you're going to be in, and then to try to be the best professional that you can be, and to look at it as a profession.
Indeed, it is definitely a profession, and people can keep their head high in terms of becoming master salespeople, because the level of complexity that it represents to become a master is as complex and as much of accomplishment, if not more so, than a lot of other disciplines that have more recognition in that. But look, once you mentioned AI, I've talked to different organizations that are perfecting the use of AI to be able to push the decision down the train, so that when someone is a skilled salesperson getting involved, it is a bona fide closing opportunity, or it's a much more mature decision that might have existed previously in the absence of AI. But look, some of the same roles are always going to exist. Deep in the book, I really, it's very important to know how to prospect. And in this day and age, people are prospecting, by emails and LinkedIn. Some people, love cold calling, others don't. A lot of people who don't love cold calling, I think it's the most beautiful thing in the world if LinkedIn tells them that cold calling is dead and they don't have to do it.
Yeah.
But the reality is there's no more direct way of engaging with the prospect and creating a pitch opportunity than getting someone on the phone. And it really is a lost art. But how do you make decisions around how to balance that out? And so I do get into a lot of KPIs, data, and predictability. The whole point of the book is how to make sales predictable, with the right approach, positioning, sales strategy, and data. I could sit down with a rep, do a review, and I can say, how much money do you want to make based on your base structure and your commission structure, and reverse engineer that income on the basis of the data points that I can measure, so that sales could be as predictable as government work with, but but you're making way more.
Yeah. Hopefully,
if you do that exercise right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really great point, because again, I think there are still people who think, well, sales is this kind of art form. It's kind of a little bit nebulous. It's down to the personality of the seller and all of that. And we know that it's nice to have these extra things, but that's not really true. The best sales are process driven, and as you said, with some level of predictability and measurement built in.
Hmm. Yeah, indeed, and I think that confuses people because I've heard so many people stand up and say, salespeople are born, not made, and
Yeah.
I call that one of the greatest myths in sales because sure, there are some people that sales is built for just because of the nature of their personality, but these are
Mhm.
also things that can be trained through desire. Everyone has the desire inside them if they're motivated correctly to bring out certain attributes, and sometimes the quiet talker is more trusted. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily, and if someone is also has a gift of sales, but doesn't really know what they're doing and can't teach it, it's a non-renewable resource. They can't build a
Mhm.
team. They're not going to
Yeah.
be able to teach others how to do this, and because it can't be broken down into a set of processes.
Y-
So, if one is scaling this, as you just commented, John, the importance of process creates scalability and replicability. You never want to have a sales force built on people that, if they leave, your organization is ruined.
Yeah, and you make a great point, and just to reinforce that, yeah, there a lot of times in organizations you'll have, well, Jeffrey's the best seller, so just do what Jeffrey does, and then they see, hey, Jeffrey, what do you do? And Jeffrey's like, "Well, I don't really know." He's unconsciously comp. Jeffrey's fantastic at selling, but he's no idea how he is. He can't codify it. He can't put it down as a process for somebody. And quite frankly, the way you do it may not suit anybody else anyway. So that idea, as you said, that thing needs to be put to bed once and for all. Or that idea of just do what he does. Uh,
Indeed. Yeah,
yeah.
it's just not enough information, and it's vulnerable. So yeah, couldn't concur more. Look, sometimes you're going to have someone who, if they're not going to take away from your process and they're going to put up some numbers, but probably they're going to be independent. They're not going to be something you can build around.
Yeah, yeah, no, and then obviously then you have to also bear in mind that if you have those kind of mavericks in your organization, you have to ask yourself, what impact does that have on the rest of the team? And can I afford to have that? Can I afford to have one person operating very differently from everybody else? Because that raises its own issues. So where do you see this? I mean, do you see this moving anytime soon into a discipline, as you said, the fifth pillar? Do you see that coming into colleges, or do you think there's a lot of resistance there?
Look, I'm hopeful because a lot of universities are based on creating new programs that are going to give them an edge. And I look at the University of Western Ontario, for example, which is where Alan Shepard, who I visited after, they created this Ivy School of Sales. So they're trying to teach it a little bit more than some of the others, and they can generate revenue from that. They can attract students on the basis of that. Um, I think it really is a matter of, if any institution decides that they want to introduce this, they just have to build it around a common set of principles that can be agreed upon academically in order for them to feel that they're not deviating from some of those academic principles. So,
Hmm.
in part, the more we talk about this, the more people that realize that sales is process driven and can be adapted to any situation and can be taught so that students, at the end of it, can become professional salespeople. Look, as a as a long career as a CEO, I talk to a lot of CEOs of corporations. CEOs are responsible for revenue.
Yeah.
They're often the best salesperson in the organization. CFOs are responsible for costs, the
Hmm.
bottom line versus top line. So there is a need for that, and whether one couches it in programs that allow people to fast track to become a chief executive position, or sales, or however it's positioned, there's a huge opportunity, and I do feel that is where some progressive institutions are going. As soon as a few more fall, I think we may see that as the best growth opportunity in academia moving forward.
Yeah, and there's a huge need for sales leadership programs, and I think that's that's an area that's massively lacking. And again, it falls into that same old thing as, hey, Geoffrey's the best seller. Geoffrey, you're now the sales leader, and you're like,
Right.
okay, I didn't even know if I wanted to be a leader, and now you go from being the best seller to probably an average at best sales leader, because you're not. There's no training, there's no preparation, and you may not be the best candidate for that job.
Yeah, spot on. That's often how people have been promoted. So chapter 3 and 4 of the book, I'm getting into how to hire that high performance sales team and what attributes. Some people are going to be your best sellers. Some people are going to play a different role, just like it's a sports team, because they're going to be better on the management side and better developers. And chapter 4 gets into how to develop that high performance sales team. And one of the recommendations, obviously, is having people in sales leadership who can be a great example in sales, but are just better managers. And that's a shortcut that is almost pervasive in sales coming out of the 20th century into the 21st.
Yeah. No, I would say your greatest revenue multiplier is having a good sales leader or great sales leader, because because if you can get just a little bit extra out of each of your salespeople, just think of what that translates to in revenue terms.
Yeah, and indeed, and look, most problems that businesses have can be solved from revenue, but they cost cut because everyone feels that they have a much better relationship with how to cut costs than, when you say, how much money are we going to make? That's almost predicting the future. But with the right processes, you can create predictability around that and really shift the whole performance of an organization on the basis of tapping into the potential that revenue predictability can create for a business.
Yeah. No, as we always say, revenue fixes everything, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, listen, Geoffrey, this has been fascinating. All of Geoffrey's information will be below this video. But before we go, please do tell people a little bit more about you and what you do.
Yeah. Well, look, for 25 years, I learned sales through a very strong sales organization where I started as a sales executive, and on the basis of my performance, had an opportunity to manage and become a director, growing up the ladder all the way to CEO. And this was a global company with 50 locations in dozens of countries that organizes hundreds of business events. So I really had a perspective from the bottom to the top. And that journey was really a 25-year journey. And I always said that I wasn't going to do anything for 25 years or longer than 25 years. So the book was a real bookmark to that career, where I could really take everything out of my brain. And in many ways now I'm doing similar things fractionally, supporting organizations and really helping, spread this message through not only the book, but through speaking. I have a TED Talk coming up, which really will break through the whole idea of the power of belief in sales, and explaining that through quantum science or quantum physics, etc. So in many ways, if I can do what I did internally for 25 years in developing the best and brightest people from scratch to the top performers, if I can take that and extend that to in a broader way, scale that in the outside world, that will really fulfill what I'm trying to do at this point in my career.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it's a great work that you're doing, Geoffrey, and much needed. So thank you again. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see you all again very soon. Thank you.